walking on gilded splinters.
Oh, nice. Little classic Dr. John reference. Good way to start this show, and hello, friends. Indeed. Welcome in to this, the 111th edition of Fusebox, lyrically entitled Boundary Blues. And I'm your splitting infinitives because I like the sound they make, host Mark Rose. And over there, building a wall of sonic excellence to our show, as always, the 33rd degree Mason of Meters, Milt Keynes, everybody.
Yeah, thank you kindly. So did you catch that blood moon eclipse thing a few days back?
I heard about it. I did not actually see it, though.
Oh, watching Invasion of the Slug Nuns again, were you?
No, although that is truly a cinematic marvel, Mr. Keynes. No, I did not see it, but I did see some rather startling video, though.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, really. But the real news was the meteorite that exploded on the moon.
Really?
Yeah. They have footage of this little flash that happened at the same time as this blood moon thing. Apparently there was this astronomer dude who was pretty damn obsessed with capturing the meteor striking the moon.
Yeah.
And he had like 8 different telescopes all trained on different parts of the moon. And he was like, recording for days to get this strike.
Huh. Well, then he must have had some pretty good intel that there would be a meteor strike then, right?
Yeah. Well, like I say, he was pretty involved in the research there. And I guess he was right.
So why am I thinking you're not buying the meteor thing?
Well, you'd be right. My guess is that something more likely came off the moon than landed on it.
Oh, I see. Okay, so like it came from one of the alleged moon bases run by Nazis up there. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, that's complete crap.
Oh.
Now, some of their ex-scientists may have been involved in the early development, okay? But at this point, it's either us or the giant mantis alien.
Oh, okay. So the whole Nazi moon base thing is total crap, but the giant mantis aliens, they're the real deal.
Oh, it's gotta be, bro. I mean, if you look back at some of the shots from amateur astronomers over the last few years, well, you'll see some crazy-ass shit up there, man.
What, like Marriott's and Holiday Inns and stuff like that?
Laugh if you want, amigo, but I'm just saying, there are pictures of these weird tower-like structures and some stuff that looks like domes and all kinds of things like that.
I have heard a theory that many believe, in fact, that the moon is actually hollow, that it was a craft that was parked in our orbit millions of years ago. Hence the reason it appears to be stationary and doesn't, rotate like other objects in the solar system here.
Yeah, I heard that too. It is kind of creepy that the thing just sits up there like that, not moving. Seriously though, man, check out some of those shots of the moon taken by these astronomers. It'll get you thinking.
Perhaps. But more likely, it'll get me thinking what version of Adobe After Effects they were using. But be that as it mayn't. Friends, we have a gloriously grounded program planned here today. Coming up in a bit, we have a delightful chat with Chris Neal, who is the head of security and public safety for the Port of Portland, a position which, especially in these days that we find ourselves in, has great significance, to say the least. But first, this little nugget of interest, which Mr. Keynes does align with perfection to your blood moon eclipse thing. The St. Johns County Sheriff's Office told WJXT-TV that a car belonging to some moon gazers, which they had parked directly on Ponte Vedra Beach that night, evidently forgot to keep an eye on the quickly rising tide as they watched Sunday night's lunar eclipse. The sheriff's office said the car's occupants had been watching the eclipse and failed to notice the high tide coming in. The vehicle had to be pulled out of the Atlantic Ocean early Monday. No injuries were reported, but their car was swamped and had to be towed out of the water. Yes, that's right. And meanwhile, in a slightly more unfortunate event, a Florida police officer ran over a man and woman who they say were lying in a road to watch the celestial event.
Wait, what?
I'm not making this up, man. They were lying in the road.
And didn't hear the car coming?
See, I'm thinking that maybe you and Marcy, just as an example, right? You two just probably stood out on your back porch and watched it, right? Maybe even got up on the roof. I don't know. But I think it's safe to say that lying down in the middle of the street wasn't the first choice, right?
So they had their ears filled with cotton so they could see it better?
Mr. Keynes, the mind boggles. Just boggles. It's why, of course, we sincerely ask, nay, implore, the time-honored question.
What the fuck, Florida?
Oy, oy, oy. Well, we shall return in a flash with the Fusebox interview and our guest on this edition of the show, Chris Neal, from the Port of Portland, right after this.
The show for everybody, but not everybody will like it.
So, a few weeks back, I had the distinct pleasure to sit down with Chris Neal from the Port of Portland. He's a most gracious chap who was very articulate concerning the goings-on at the Port of Portland and some of his specific duties, which are, as they say, a plateful. Friends, Portland is a very unique city in terms of its ports. Other things too, but in terms of its ports. And transportation in general and how this is all cleverly managed. All this shall be revealed, friends, in the interview to follow, I promise. But the first thing is that I wanted to mention was that when I had talked with Chris about possibly doing an interview with for our show here, the country was not partially closed. The essential services component of our government was not at that point anyway, being held hostage, as it were. But there were talks of, walls and security fears and all of that stuff.
Yeah, and we're in our second month of that now, for crying out loud.
Yes. And at least at the time we recorded this, there was certainly no compromise in sight from anybody. So this interview becomes even more timely and relevant than first envisioned. So, let's meet Chris, shall we? On this,
The Fusebox interview.
As we were talking earlier, before we started spinning here, when we first designed doing this interview, the country was not in its present situation that it is in right now, which sort of addresses a multitude of things that we will get to shortly.
Yeah.
But just so the folks can get a kind of handle on things, what is your actual title with the port?
Yeah, the actual title is Public Safety and Security Director.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that still makes my brain hurt just thinking about it. But and how long have you been
doing
in
that?
This position?
About 2.5 years,
Wow.
so relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, relatively new.
Yeah,
But
I think it would be helpful for people that are, a lot of the listeners to this program are in other parts of the world. So They may not know the geographic parameters and specifics of where we live. Portland is fed by 2 rivers, and maybe you can tell us a little bit of how this sits geographically.
Right, and I can actually even better right where the Port of Portland is. So, yeah, you got the Willamette, north and south, Columbia, east, west, and the Port of Portland is a half a mile from the Columbia. I mean, it's right there on the river, so it's great view from the desk, of course, when I have time to be at the desk. But yeah, right there along the Columbia, and then maybe another few miles from Willamette. I mean, right there where the 2 meet.
Yeah. So and because of that, the Columbia also interfaces with the state of Washington.
That's right.
That's part of the thing too. So you have to somehow coordinate between Washington and the state.
Yeah, you could see it right across. From my desk, you could see Washington.
Does that pose any issues in terms of
just going up the highway 205? That's the issue.
Yes, it would be. Anybody knows what that's like.
Yeah, the traffic.
I would imagine that the strategic challenges of that are many, and we'll talk about that in a second. But does this also require a fair amount of cooperation between the state of Washington and the state of Oregon?
It does. I mean, when we're specifically talking about security and policing and things like that, and all the different groups that I have in public safety and security, which is fire and police, et cetera, I'd say the biggest thing are the partnerships between the two. If we're responding, our fire department, because the Port of Portland has its own fire department. Right. And so we respond there on the Columbia, but we respond with Washington and so forth, and the state and Coast Guard and everybody else. So a lot of that is partnerships.
Yeah, there has to be a fair amount of diplomacy going on with relationships like that. This is unique. I've lived in other places that have water, and they have port authorities. I have never encountered a cooperation of things as there is in the port. Now, you oversee more than just ships, because most people are going to hear this as boat traffic.
That's right. But very good question.
Just elaborate a little bit on what's entailed here.
It is a port authority regionally, and so not only do we have all the terminals where the barges and ships and things like that come in up and down the Willamette side, north and south, but it's the airport, which is particularly where I'm at the airport there, PDX, which is, like I mentioned, right along the Columbia there. And then not just PDX, because we also have Hillsborough, and we've also got Troutdale Airport. So there's 3 different airports there, and then 4 different marine terminals, as well as a lot of business land properties and things like that, which I don't know all those by heart. So
we won't grill you. But I think it's unusual, and at least in the places that I've lived before, where a port authority like that encompasses air traffic for one thing.
So much,
it is very, very unique.
Right.
The choreography of all of these pieces must be enormous.
A lot of great people. That's how I'd sum it up. A lot of good people. I mean, it's a fascinating being in a meeting where in the first 10 minutes you're talking about airplanes, and in the second 10 minutes you're talking about wheat coming out of a terminal or Ford trucks going to China and back and forth, things like that.
Right.
So, yes, it's very unique.
Well, since we were chatting about the airport here, I have to say this. This was a tradition that I encountered decades ago.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know where it got started. Perhaps you do, but it's a fascinating thing, friends. Most people who visit the Portland airport, upon their arrival, have a tradition in place where they photograph their feet on the carpeting of the gate that they have entered, and usually post these pictures to social media all over the place. I don't know where that got started, but it's a fascinating thing, and I know they recently changed the carpeting.
Oh my God!
A public outcry.
It was
heard, but it still goes on, and it still. Do you know anything about the history of that?
I honestly don't know where it started, and like I said, I've been working in the airport for maybe 5 years, and so when I first heard about it, I too thought it was pretty off kilter myself with foot selfies. What's that about? So I don't know where it started, and you're right. it was a public outcry, when they moved the carpet and put the new one in. But people still do it. And the carpet's got its own Facebook page.
Oh, it does? Oh, goodness gracious.
Facebook. Yes. But we love it. We love PDX.
Yes, we do. And that's following up on that is a very interesting thing. This airport, it's not just me talking, friends. This airport has been recognized for how many years now?
6 years in a row. 6 years in a row is the best airport in the country, and we are very proud of that. I've got 4 or 5 T-shirts of it.
Wow. No, it is true, and I can honestly say that even the very first time I came out here and flew into that airport, it was instantly welcoming.
Yeah.
There was something about it that was, I don't know. And I've been into some very Byzantine airports, and this just sort of welcomed you. It was like easy to get from point A to point B.
It's a customer service culture, and PDX invests in that a lot. Mm-hmm. And we celebrate it multiple times a year. Every year there's a big celebration right around, I think it's springtime-ish, on customer service engagement, recognizing those that have went above and beyond to make PDX exactly what you just said it is.
There seems to be an enormous amount of collaboration being invited by the port to the community. Hey, help us. You got some ideas. We're open to listen to it. It's not a closed door policy. At least I don't get that impression from what I've read and certainly talking with you.
Right. It's absolutely not. And you mentioned the fact that we're investing in new infrastructure and so forth to meet capacity issues over potentially the next 20 years or so. The travel is just going to be too big. The capacity just won't be big enough. Mm-hmm. And part of that was reaching out to our community and asking, look, when we go in here and change things with this PDX that you love so much, we want you to be part of this process. We don't want you to walk in the year 2025 is when we're hoping to cut the ribbon, God willing, that it's this completely different experience that you're not used to. We want you to still love PDX for all the reasons it is today when we cut the ribbon on it tomorrow.
Just a moment ago, you were referring to the fact that the port has its own fire department and police force. That's unusual.
It is. And I am proud as hell of it too, and so are they. So my specific family for public safety and security, we have our own police department. We have our own fire department. We have our own dispatch center. Now we're connected to the city of Portland, but we have our own dispatch, 911. As well as aviation security. This is the group that keeps people from moving throughout the airport where they shouldn't be moving, access doors and things like that. And then also an emergency management program as well we've got. And then finally, our badging department. This is where you go and get your badge so you can access. And then we'll do background checks and things like that to make sure Mark is who Mark says he is.
Right. How complicated is that when you're interfacing with city police or state or whatever in that case?
That's a good question. Right back to what we talked about earlier with IGAs, these intergovernmental agreements. So when we respond collaboratively, like you just mentioned, particularly if something happens on the interstate 205 or if it happens at Cascade Station. Though the jurisdiction may overlap, there are agreements in place to where we know that the city is going to show up and we're going to show up as well. And then we'll work together once we get there to resolve whatever it is, whether it's police, whether it's fire. We have agreements in place. Yeah. But we work very well together. We speak routinely with city fire, city police, etc.
We find ourselves in a very strange position right now. At the time of recording, the federal government is closed. Certain essential services are presently on hold, and hopefully that will only be a short term, but we don't know yet. Now, TSA and air traffic controllers and folks like that, of course, work there at the airports and so forth. Are there effects of this shutdown that are making themselves known to your?
Oh yeah, there are, and it's people effects, and that's what breaks my heart the most. Because all those folks that you just mentioned, they break into a couple categories of essential and non-essential. If you're non-essential, then yeah, you're staying home right now, and you're
Right.
praying that, and when this is all over, you'll get a paycheck for all that back pay. But if you're essential, the uniform, like you mentioned, TSA, which is where I was before I got this job.
Ah, okay.
If you're in the uniform, you're essential for air travel. I mean, it's a security thing, Department of Homeland Security. And so, yeah, you're working every day and you're not being paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you would feel about having to come to work every day and not get a paycheck. It's sad.
Yeah,
it really is. And
my
feel for
feelings
them.
on that are echoed very loudly in the last program. So yes, I would not be very happy. The point being that, as an independent business owner myself, it's something that we can appreciate intimately when
Yeah.
you're not paid for something, and yet to be doing work and not getting paid for it is tough. It's a very, very, very challenging place to be.
And we've been blessed here at PDX because we have not had any issues. Some of these other airports have potentially TSA that calling out, not showing up to work. We will continue to say this, I'm sure, throughout the interview, is the camaraderie and the family and the culture that we have at PDX, which is so exclusive. We haven't had that problem.
One of the things that's not entering in the conversation these days, people coming into the country and so forth, they're coming in a variety of ways. And one of those ways is through the airport, right through the checkpoint.
Okay.
Have you encountered any sorts of unusual activity, or in recent times, let's just say, a spike in activity that was odd?
No, not odd, because I definitely don't want too many things to surprise us day after day.
Yes.
We'd like to have been in front of it. As it comes to when we're talking border security and things like that, not much specifically with the checkpoint. If anything, that's more of, CBP when folks are coming in from other countries into the airport. Your first contact is CBP. And so we will respond, police, law enforcement will respond if there's an issue there. But the initial contact for public safety and security for someone coming from another country into the United States at the airport is more CBP there. Where we're focusing a lot now, if we're talking about some of the things that we're having to work on, is marijuana. That's really where a lot of our effort, law enforcement wise, is going toward, because it's legal here,
correct?
Not everywhere else,
right?
And so folks will come in with money to get product and then take it out. And so we're watching you.
I see. Fascinating. Yeah. Okay. Well, that would be a thing.
That's a thing.
Because since we've been talking about security and things of that nature, it brings up an interesting question, which I guess for a while, at least in this part of the country, has been a sort of mute. But that would be the question of real ID. Maybe you can explain that a little bit.
Yes. Real ID started several years ago. I think it was in the Bush administration, where they were looking for two things. One, to enhance driver's license ID, so forth, out of the DMV, security features wise for, fraudulent ID, duplication, things like that. But then also to ensure citizenship of the United States. And like I said, this was a long time ago that this came out. And long story short, year over years, the federal government has given extensions for states to catch up and change their DMV practices and procedures to do those things, security features and birth certificates and things like that, to ensure your citizenship. And finally, a couple of years ago, the federal government put its foot down and said, after October 2020, you no longer will be able to traverse through federal facilities without this enhanced ID. And states, you all need to get on board. And unfortunately, Oregon and Washington were some of the few to get on board a little late. And so I'll just stick with Oregon, a little late to the game, if you will. For a while there, we were anti this for a lot of reasons. which, no debate there.
Right.
But now we need to get on board. And October 2020 is the deadline.
Interesting. Now, this would be like a card.
This is a driver's license. This is a card
Yeah.
that you'll be able to go to the DMV and get.
Mm-hmm.
And so Oregon will be ready to issue those in July of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So, big deal, because one of those federal facilities is the checkpoint at the airport.
Of course it is.
There are nuclear facilities and all these other things that I imagine you and most of us don't go to.
Correct.
But the one that'll matter to me and to you and to most of us is the checkpoint. And this includes that.
Oh, no. Does this mean another trip to the DMV? I just renewed
Yeah, looks to be. And I got to say, that little bit of info was most enlightening, as I had heard rumblings about a new ID in the works, and evidently the rest of the country kind of blinked and went, okay, just slid into line. But seriously, there were some issues about the legality of this thing, and at the least, the ethics of it. But clearly, we live in interesting times, friends. Now, many of you listening in other parts of the country may already be aware of this, quote, enhanced ID, or maybe you already have one. But for us out here in the Pacific Northwest, it seems there is still some opposition and consternation concerning it. And as Chris mentioned there, a valid passport will suffice for the time being, but eventually everybody will need one of these cards, I'm afraid.
Is this more chip stuff?
No, and as I understand it, it's merely, quote, enhanced by verifying that you are, in fact, a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, I'm thinking there's still going to be some folks out here that won't be going along quietly, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and you know what? I totally get it, man. And since the state of Washington was also uncertain about the ramifications of this ID, evidently they too get it.
Yeah, the other thing that got me was that whole private police and fire department thing the port has, and how they work with the city versions of that. I mean, if they can get that to work, maybe they could send some folks to D.C., see if they could get the Senate and Congress to cooperate.
You know what? That's a brilliant point, Mr. Keynes, and I second that notion. Indeed. Thanks again to Chris Neal for sitting down with us for the interview. And for those interested, there is a link in the show notes to our friends there at the Port of Portland, for those curious, as that organization manages a bunch of other things, including ensuring environmental preservation and all sorts of green practices, and it will amaze and astound you. Check it out. And, of course, the PDX Carpet Facebook page will also have a link for you there. Only here would a carpet get a Facebook page. Okay, so with that, we will call it a show and take our barges down the river, but not before thanking our contributors this time out. Nico Lane for always wondrous exclamations. And, of course, Chris Neal from the Port of Portland for being a most gracious guest. And Trista Perez for spectacular ID-ment. Yes, but also the DMV-hating Milt Keynes for technical assistance and such.
Oh, like I'm the only guy who hates that trip.
You and 150 million of your closest friends. And, of course, thanks as always to you, friends, for pushing play on this edition of Fusebox wherever you obtain this fine program. Be it Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or the nearly famous Overnightscape Underground channel at unsug.com, as we most sincerely appreciate your participation in that way. I have been your wistful wall-crawling host, Mark Rose, saying, until our next cartoon.
Fuse.